The Siltheri flagship, Dawn of Triumph, cut through Earth's sky like a blade through silk. It descended over the broken skyline of New York City, its polished black hull gleaming under a gray, heavy sky. From the command deck, Commander Vriss looked down on the ruins with a sneer curling across his jagged mouth. "This is victory," he declared to his officers, his voice echoing through the great hall. The scanners told the same story. Minimal life signs, no military forces detected, no organized resistance at all. Just a few weak energy readings scattered across the dust-choked streets. It looked like Earth had simply surrendered. Vriss found the thought disappointing. He had expected more from humanity, at least a little fight to make the conquest interesting. He turned to his second-in-command, a smaller Siltheri named Rawl, whose blue eyes flickered with unease. "Deploy ground units. Begin securing the city," Vriss ordered. "Send the Declaration of Dominion. Let them know who their new masters are." Rawl hesitated a fraction too long before nodding. "At once, Commander." Transports dropped from the belly of the Dawn of Triumph, engines roaring. Black-armored Siltheri soldiers stormed the empty streets, weapons drawn, their heavy boots clanging against the crumbling pavement. But the city was silent. Too silent. Storefronts gaped like broken teeth. Skyscrapers stood hollow, their windows shattered, paper drifting like lost spirits in the stale breeze. Abandoned cars rusted at odd angles. A child's toy lay forgotten in the dirt, its paint peeling under the weight of years. The soldiers spread out, searching for any sign of life. They found nothing. No humans, no pets, not even birds in the sky, only the sound of their own footsteps, echoing back at them from empty streets. Private Sarth, a young Siltheri recruit, tightened his grip on his plasma rifle as he passed an overturned bus. He could feel it, that prickling sensation at the back of his neck, the feeling of being washed. But when he turned, there was only fog rolling in, thick and slow, swallowing the city in a blanket of pale mist. Above them, in the safety of the command deck, Vriss frowned. Something was wrong. The scanners had picked up life signs earlier. Where had they gone? Why weren't they resisting? Why weren't they even visible? He slammed his fist against the console. "Send the hunters. Sweep every block. Tear the city apart if you must." Below, the soldiers moved out, vanishing one by one into the fog. None of them noticed the pair of eyes watching from a shattered window. None of them heard the soft click of a rifle being loaded. None of them saw the shadow that blended perfectly into the soot-covered walls, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Siltheri had come expecting an easy conquest. They had made their first mistake. They assumed humanity would fight like they did. The fog thickened, curling around the Siltheri soldiers like a living thing. It slithered between their legs, brushed against their armored suits, and whispered of something just out of sight. Private Sarth's hand trembled as he wiped the mist from his helmet's visor. His breath came out in foggy clouds, but his rifle remained steady at his side. The entire patrol had spread out, sweeping the city block by block, searching for any sign of life. Yet the more they searched, the emptier it felt. "Where are they?" Sarth muttered to himself. The city had been their first target. If there were any humans left, surely they would have shown themselves by now. Nothing. They moved deeper into the fog, lights from their helmets casting pale beams across the wreckage. A broken car sat abandoned in the middle of the street, its tires long deflated, a forgotten cigarette still smoldering on the sidewalk next to it. A flicker caught Sarth's eye. He stiffened. It was gone before he could make sense of it. A shadow darting across the alleyway. "Did you see that?" Sarth barked, his voice breaking the silence. He spun around, his plasma rifle aimed at the shadows. But the alley was empty. Only broken glass crunched underfoot as the fog rolled in thicker. The other soldiers paused, scanning the area, but their movements slowed. Tension rippled through the air, a feeling of being watched, though nothing was visible. The soldiers' confidence was starting to crack. "What's wrong, Sarth? came the gruff voice of Sergeant Core, his rifle slung over his shoulder as he looked down the street. He was the oldest of the patrol, and if anyone was immune to fear, it was Core. "I swear I saw something. In the alley. A movement." Sarth's voice trembled despite himself. Core shook his head. "It's just the fog, Private. Focus." But Sarth couldn't shake it. He had heard stories back on their homeworld of planets that were haunted, places where the enemy could blend into the very surroundings. Could it be true? Then it happened. A sharp crack echoed through the fog, followed by the unmistakable sound of a weapon being fired. The burst of plasma erupted from a rooftop, too quick to see, but the explosion tore through the air just inches from Core's face, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the street. "Ambush," Core shouted, as the patrol scattered. The Silferi soldiers raised their rifles, scanning the buildings around them, but there was nothing. Only the thickening fog. Another shot rang out, and then another. This time, the plasma blast hit one of the soldiers square in the chest, knocking him backward, his armor smoking. The soldiers were suddenly on edge, swiveling in all directions, trying to catch the invisible enemy. There was no time to regroup, no sign of who was attacking. Only shadows and whispers. The soldiers were ghosts in their own city, afraid of what they couldn't see. "Retreat," Core yelled, but it was too late. The first soldier vanished into the fog without a trace, his cries cut short. And then the others began to disappear, one by one. No shots fired. No enemies visible. Just silence. The fog hung heavy in the air, now a living thing, choking the breath from the soldiers' chests. Every shadow stretched unnaturally. Every rustling of leaves or creak of steel gripped their attention. The city was a ghost town, or worse, a hunting ground. Sergeant Core staggered back, his heart pounding in his chest. His grip tightened around his rifle, but even the hum of its power felt distant, swallowed by the thick mist. Around him, his squad moved in a slow, methodical circle, checking every corner, every window. But their once confident steps had turned to cautious shuffles. "Form up," Core barked, his voice low, grating with tension. But the words felt weak. The fog swallowed them, and with each passing second, it became harder to ignore the creeping sense of dread building in his bones. One of the soldiers, Corporal Leth, was the first to break. He'd been glancing nervously to the rooftops, eyes darting, his footfalls too fast for someone accustomed to battle. Leth's breathing came in sharp, ragged bursts, as though every inhale scraped against the air. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Core frowned, scanning the street ahead. "What do you mean?" "There's nothing." But Leth's eyes were wide, his gaze locked on something ahead. Something Core couldn't see. It made the pit of his stomach tighten. Then, without warning, Leth spun and fired a burst from his plasma rifle, a scatter of bright blue light cutting through the fog. The shot echoed, but there was no target, no enemy in sight. Core's instincts flared. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped. But Leth was already backing away, his rifle now swinging wildly from side to side. His fingers squeezed the trigger again and again, sending sporadic shots into the fog. A sharp crack, not from the plasma gun, split the air. Leth's rifle exploded in a flash of sparks. He shrieked, stumbling back, his arms flailing, his face contorted in terror. Core lunged forward, grabbing his subordinate's arm, pulling him back. "Leth, what happened?" But the answer came too late. Another loud snap sounded, and Leth was gone, vanished into the mist as if the fog had claimed him. The air seemed to grow colder, the shadows deeper. Core's heart hammered. He swiveled, eyes wide, scanning. There had to be something. Someone. But the city remained eerily still. No movement. No trace of the enemy. Then came the whispers. They were faint at first, no louder than the breeze. Soft voices, foreign voices, cutting through the fog like knives. Barely audible but growing clearer. Too many of them. Too many to ignore. Kor's throat tightened, and his pulse quickened. He couldn't see them, but he could feel them closing in. Something was out there. The humans. They weren't just hiding. They were hunting. And now, they were hunting him. The sharp snap of a branch broke his focus. Kor whirled around, rifle raised, but before his finger could pull the trigger, something struck him from behind. A sudden pressure, like a vice closing around his throat. He gasped for air, his vision spinning his hands. Human hands pinned him to the ground. And then, as his world dimmed, he realized what had happened. The humans weren't invisible. They had simply become invisible. The dawn of triumph hovered silently above the earth, its dark silhouette now a symbol of failure. Inside the ship, Commander Vriss paced restlessly, his fingers tapping against his armored gauntlet, his mind a storm of confusion and rage. His ground forces, the finest warriors that Siltheri Dominion had ever produced, had vanished into thin air. Report. Vriss's voice cracked like thunder through the communication room. He couldn't hide the frustration in his tone. This was supposed to be an easy conquest, a swift strike against a primitive species. But the humans, these supposed primitives, were proving to be something altogether different. We've lost contact with over half of our soldiers, Commander Raul, his second in command, said, his voice trembling despite his efforts to remain calm. The last reports were unsurprising. They mentioned shadows, movement in the fog. Vriss turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Shadows? What nonsense is this? Raul swallowed, his usual confidence drained. We think they are using some sort of camouflage technology, Commander. It's unlike anything we've encountered. They're blending into the environment, using their surroundings to hide, to strike when least expected. Vriss's mind reeled. Camouflage? It was an absurd thought. No species could disappear completely. And yet, it was the only explanation that made sense. His soldiers weren't simply being defeated, they were being hunted by an enemy they couldn't even see. Get me the data on their tactics. Vriss snapped, turning away from Raul to the large display screen behind him. Images flickered to life, footage of his soldiers being picked off one by one, but each one told a story of chaos and confusion. The soldier would disappear into the fog, and then nothing. A shot would ring out, but no target appeared. The Siltheri were warriors, trained to fight enemies head-on, not face an invisible opponent who struck from the shadows. They turned the city into a trap, Raul muttered, his face pale. They're not just hiding. They're adapting, learning. Vriss paused. He'd heard rumors of adaptive camouflage techniques used by other species, but those were primitive, limited in scope. The humans, however, had evolved something different. Something dangerous. Do they have the ability to see us? Vriss asked slowly, his voice growing cold. Raul hesitated. We believe so. They have sensors, eyes that can see through the fog, or perhaps they use other methods. They're not relying on the same techniques as us. It's almost as if their very presence blends with the world around them. Vriss clenched his fists. The truth settled on him like a weight. The humans didn't just hide. They became the landscape. A man could be a tree, a stone, a shadow. They could vanish into the environment itself, turning the tables completely. And worse still, they weren't just doing this on the ground. They'd already begun to adapt the skies, blending with the treetops, the ruins of buildings. They've turned our greatest strength, our numbers, our strength, into a weakness, Vriss growled. Send out the hunters. We cannot let them win. We will find them, even if we have to burn the planet to the ground. But as he said the words, something nagged at the back of his mind. Something darker than fear. Could he con fire and steel stop an enemy who didn't need to fight, who simply was? The trap had been set, and that Siltheri had walked right into it. In the distance, the newly constructed human survivor camp gleamed under the dying light of the day. It was a masterstroke of deception, a city made to look like a haven for the last of humanity, complete with fortified walls, banners waving in the breeze, and the faint sound of laughter carried on the wind. It was perfect. The Xilthari would never suspect the truth. Commander Vriss stood in the command center of the dawn of triumph. His eyes narrowed as he watched the scenes unfold below. The human resistance, as he had been told, was so weak, a few dozen survivors, holed up in what appeared to be a last-ditch effort to rally their people. How foolish of them to think the Xilthari would fall for such a transparent trap. "The humans are gathering at the camp," Rull reported, his voice cold with certainty. "They believe they are safe. That is where we strike." Vriss smiled cruelly. "Yes, we'll make them regret ever thinking they could hide. Move in, full force. Take the city. Leave no survivors." Below, the Xilthari forces moved with precision. They poured into the city's outer edges, surrounding it like a great, crushing fist. The air crackled with the hum of weapons charging, the heavy boots of the soldiers echoing in the streets as they advanced. And then, just as Vriss had commanded, the first shots rang out, loud and deadly, aimed at the carefully constructed walls. But as the blasts struck, they revealed the truth. The city was a mirage. The walls collapsed with a thunderous crash, not from the power of the Xilthari weapons, but because they were nothing more than hollow shells, built from scrap and illusion. The ground beneath their feet was rigged, and as the first Xilthari stepped forward, he disappeared into a trap. A section of the road caved in beneath him, swallowing him whole. He screamed, his voice lost to the depths, as the ground closed over him. The Xilthari soldiers froze, disoriented. And then, from every corner of the so-called survivor camp, humans appeared. Dozens of them, no longer hiding, no longer passive. They moved like ghosts through the streets, emerging from the shadows and blending into the broken architecture, as though they had always been there. Sergeant Kor, alive but bruised, was one of them. He crouched low behind a ruined wall, watching as the Xilthari struggled to regain control. His fingers worked swiftly, planting explosive charges, connecting wires. His eyes were sharp, calculating. The humans had waited for the Xilthari to believe the ruse, to enter the city thinking it was an easy victory. But it was the Xilthari who had fallen into a trap, not the humans. The city wasn't a safe haven, it was the battlefield. Every corner, every empty building, every pile of debris had been rigged with traps and hidden explosives. With a nod to his squad, Kor hit the button. The ground trembled as the charges detonated, sending fire and smoke into the sky. Several Xilthari soldiers were caught in the blast, their screams cut short. The humans surged forward, invisible once more, using the chaos to strike swiftly, picking off the Xilthari one by one. Their enemies had walked into a war zone they hadn't been prepared for, a city designed to be their grave. From above, Vriss watched the carnage unfold, his face twisted in disbelief. He had underestimated humanity. He had miscalculated. "This city, it's a trap," Rail shouted, panic creeping into his voice. "They knew we'd come here." Vriss stared at the screen, his fists clenched in rage. He couldn't afford to lose. Not now. Not when victory had been so close. But in the distance, the humans were already disappearing again, slipping back into the shadows, vanishing like smoke. The Xilthari had walked into their last mistake. The Xilthari had made their move, and now they were paying the price. The air was thick with smoke, the scent of burning debris mixing with the cold tang of fear. In the streets below, the remaining Xilthari forces staggered, their once pristine ranks splintered, their confidence shattered. Commander Vriss watched in silent fury from his ship's command deck, his sharp eyes glued to the chaos unfolding in the heart of the city. The once mighty assault had turned into a scramble for survival. His warriors, once feared across the galaxy, were now nothing more than prey, hunted by the humans they had come to conquer. Vriss slammed his fist onto the console, sending sparks flying. "Send in the full strike force. I want them eradicated." His voice was a snarl, but even he knew that the humans were no longer the hunted. They had become the hunters. Below, Sergeant Kor moved through the wreckage with practiced ease. His camouflage suit clung to his body like a second skin, making him nearly invisible to anyone who looked. The Siltheri had no idea where the next strike would come from, no idea who was watching them. Kor could hear them, though, frantic, panicked voices as the Siltheri tried to regroup and push forward. He was like a shadow in the smoke, his feet barely touching the ground as he moved closer to the Siltheri command post. His team was already in place, working in perfect synchronization. They had done the impossible, turned the city into a labyrinth of traps and illusions, a maze that the Siltheri were slowly suffocating in. As Kor crept through the haze, he spotted a group of Siltheri soldiers huddled near a ruined building. They were disoriented, their heads turning this way, and that as they searched for any sign of movement. But Kor wasn't the only human nearby. The signal came through his comm device, a single, low-pitched beep. It was time. Without hesitation, Kor took a step forward, then another. The Siltheri's attention remained fixed elsewhere, a flash of motion in the corner of their vision. And then, nothing. No sound. No warning. One of the Siltheri soldiers fell with a soft thud, his helmet cracked open, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. The others turned in confusion, but before they could react, a second soldier collapsed, his throat slit cleanly by the edge of a blade. Then a third, and a fourth, each one falling as swiftly and silently as the first. From the shadows, more humans emerged, silent, swift, ghosts in the smoke. They moved like a wave, striking with precision, disappearing before the Siltheri could even raise their weapons. The confusion among the enemy was palpable, their once unified front crumbling under the relentless assault. Vriss's face twisted in disbelief. How? How are they doing this? His mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. The humans were everywhere, yet nowhere. They were nowhere because they were everywhere. Every corner of the city was a death trap, every shadow a potential killer. With a guttural scream, Vriss slammed his fist against the console again. But this time, he didn't feel the satisfaction of the impact. His rage was only matched by his fear. This was no longer a battle. It was a slaughter. Retreat. Vriss ordered, his voice tight with frustration. We need to regroup. Call for reinforcements. We cannot win this. But the humans were already on their way, moving through the smoke and shadows, one step ahead of their enemy, turning the tables with every moment. The Siltheri forces were in retreat. Their once mighty march had turned into a disorganized scramble, their soldiers stumbling through the ruined city, desperate to escape the relentless onslaught. The humans had outsmarted them at every turn, their guerrilla tactics overwhelming the technologically superior invaders. Commander Vriss paced back and forth on the command deck of the Dawn of Triumph, his mind racing. This was not how it was supposed to be. The Siltheri Dominion had conquered countless worlds, crushed civilizations in their wake. Yet Earth, this insignificant planet, had proven to be their undoing. What have they done to us? Vriss muttered under his breath, his hands gripping the railing in frustration. His forces were scattered, broken, and with every passing moment, the humans grew bolder. Their attacks were more coordinated now, each strike more devastating than the last. His second-in-command, Rull, stood quietly beside him, his face pale with shock. We underestimated them, Commander. They're not just fighting for survival anymore. They're winning. Vriss's eyes flashed with fury. They are humans, weak, primitive creatures who have no business standing against the might of the Siltheri. His voice shook with a mixture of disbelief and anger. And yet, here we are, running from them like cowards. Rull hesitated. Perhaps we need to rethink our approach. These tactics, this camouflage, it's unlike anything we've encountered. The humans are using the environment against us, and we can't seem to adapt fast enough. Vriss's eyes narrowed, And for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Adapt? We're SciFi. We don't adapt, we conquer. But it's clear that their technology, their methods are beyond anything we expected. He turned toward the holoscreen, which displayed the last reports from their forces. The remaining soldiers were holed up in the eastern part of the city, their communications failing, their equipment damaged. Every attempt to launch a counteroffensive had been met with failure. We cannot let this planet remain in their hands. Vriss growled. Order the remaining forces to regroup and fortify their positions. We will not be driven off so easily. Rel nodded, his expression grim. And if the humans continue to press their attack? Vriss's lips curled into a cold, determined smile. Then we'll make them regret it. We'll burn their cities to the ground, erase their existence from this planet. But even as he said the words, doubt gnawed at him. Would that be enough? The humans had proven resourceful, smarter than he had ever imagined. And now, with each victory, they were gaining momentum. The SciFi had the firepower, the numbers, but the humans had something they couldn't match: ingenuity. In the streets below, Sergeant Kor watched as the SciFi forces began to regroup, but it was too late. The humans were already closing in. The fog swirled around them, thick and suffocating, but Kor's eyes were sharp, his movements calculated. The tables had turned. The SciFi were no longer invaders. They were the prey. And now, the humans would hunt them to the ends of the earth. The sun was setting over the shattered city, casting long shadows across the wreckage of what had once been a thriving metropolis. In the streets, the smell of burnt metal and scorched earth hung thick in the air. It was almost poetic, the calm before the storm. For the SciFi, this was the end. Commander Vriss stood atop the dawn of triumph, staring out over the battlefield. The last of his forces were holed up in a makeshift command center, barricaded in the heart of the city. His pride, his empire, everything he had fought for, was crumbling. "We failed," he muttered, his voice hollow. "We are nothing against them." Beside him, Rael stood silently, his face etched with defeat. "There is no victory here, Commander. We are outmatched." The humans had turned the tables completely. They had become an unstoppable force, using the terrain to their advantage, blending with the environment like ghosts. The SciFi's once pristine weapons and tactics were useless against an enemy that could vanish without a trace, strike from every angle, and disappear before a shot was fired. In the heart of the city, Sergeant Kor's team gathered, their faces grim, but resolute. They had seen their city torn apart, their people hurt, but now, it was time for the final push. It was time to end the war. Kor checked his rifle one last time, then turned to his squad. "This is it. We've got them on the ropes. We hit them hard, we hit them fast, and we finish this." The team moved out, melting into the shadows like the hunters they had become. They were everywhere now, scattered across the city, preparing for the final assault. The SciFi might have the numbers, but the humans had something else: unity, ingenuity, and a burning desire to protect their home. As the SciFi prepared to make their last stand, the ground beneath them began to rumble. Their sensors went crazy, but it was already too late. The humans had infiltrated the power grid, sending a surge of energy through the city's defenses. The SciFi weapons began to fail, their shields flickered and died. Kor's voice crackled over the comms. Now, with a synchronized roar, the humans launched their final attack. Explosions ripped through the SciFi positions, sending shockwaves through the streets. The SciFi soldiers fought back, but it was clear they were no longer fighting to win. They were fighting to survive. In the chaos, Vriss made his last desperate move. He ordered his remaining forces to charge, to break through the human lines, and make a stand at the city's center. But as they advanced, Kor's squad descended on them from every direction. The humans were everywhere, their tactics unstoppable. The battle raged on, but the tide had already turned. The SciFi forces were breaking, retreating, falling one by one. Vriss stood alone now, his armor battered, his strength fading. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. Kor stepped into view, his rifle at the ready, his eyes cold with resolve. "It's over, Commander." Vriss turned, his eyes wild with desperation. "You can't do this. You can't win. We are the Siltheri. We conquer." Kor shook his head. "Not anymore. This is our planet now." With that, the final shot was fired. As the dust settled and the echoes of battle faded, the humans stood victorious. The Siltheri invaders were no more. Earth had been defended. Kor looked out over the city, breathing deeply. It had been a hard-fought war, but humanity had shown its strength. They were no longer the prey. They were the hunters. And the galaxy would never forget.